I did once have chalk put in my mouth for talking so much in class. I'd wake up in the middle of the night, heart palpitating, worrying about, whether I'd shut the cat flap or bought milk or world peace. It was only when I met Jason, my husband, at 39, that I realized that I'd broken a pattern. Here was someone who actually didn't need fixing.
Before we start our conversation, we must thank our sponsor, Absolute Collagen, the fuss-free, glow-getting collagen supplement that helps women like us to redefine the second act as the best part. Mariella, I'm so excited that you are on the Second Act podcast. Welcome, 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 welcome. Let's get straight into it. I'd love you to summarize your first act in 3 words.
Oh my goodness. I hope this isn't too much of a cheat, because I don't know whether you want 3 words or a phrase that's 3 words.
You do what your heart feels.
I'm going to offer you mountaineering for beginners.
I love that. Expand, please.
Well, it was pretty hard. And I don't think I even understood quite how hard it was at the time, which is obviously how you survive, isn't it? If you don't see the mountain ahead, you just keep plodding upwards step by step, then you're far more likely to actually reach the peak. And so I moved to the UK when I was 16, came on the ferry from Ireland. I had absolutely nothing. Well, I didn't, that's not true. I had £20 a week sort of pension from my dad, who'd just died 6 months before. And I still think I was a bit like Dick Whittington. My luggage was in carrier bags because I didn't have a suitcase. And I came to London. It was a sunny May morning. I had my friend Mairead with me, who was a couple of years older, so she was the responsible one. And we were welcomed at a squat in Stoneleigh Street near Shepherd's Bush, and it was full of Irish people. And so my first disappointment was just that I'd kind of left Ireland for, great new horizons and arrived into a group of Irish people. But I was incredibly lucky because they were really kind and warm and gave us shelter for the first sort of 2-3 months. And obviously, that was a very lucky thing in a big city where all kinds of things can go wrong. And so everything that I've done since then really was just tiny Lego building block by building block by building block, or to go back to mountaineering for beginners, a sort of a steep climb to a peak I couldn't really see, and never really sure if I'd kind of make it.
I want to go and give her a hug. 16-year-old who rocked up. My goodness, we were just saying we are mothers to daughters. Can you imagine your baby girl rocking up at 16? That makes me want to cry.
It's funny, isn't it? Because I never really, I was full of bravado about it for a very long time. And it wasn't until my daughter, Molly May, hit 16. And I looked at her, and I think that children are sort of slightly more infantile these days, or at least they're allowed to be immature for longer, which I think is a great gift. But nevertheless, I looked at this 16-year-old and just thought, how did I do that? And, I also felt an incredible sense of relief that nothing truly bad, and I have to touch wood here, that nothing truly bad happened, because the level of potential for jeopardy at that age, thinking you know everything, knowing pretty much nothing at all, is quite a heavy potential.
I always say ignorance is bliss. If you knew how bad things could have gone, and you're a pretty thing, you're probably a pretty innocent thing, grieving, rocking up to the big city. How did you do that? That's wild.
You know how they say that, your formative years are really up to the age of 5. And that in many ways your character is formed by that period of time. And to be honest, I think that I had a pretty good first 5 years. I had very loving parents. we were quite stable during that period in our lives. That was before they split up and, all the turmoil started. And they gave me a sense that I could do anything. That sort of thing that unconditional love gives you. And so I think that was something that I carried with me through all the difficult years. It was so deeply rooted. And, in many ways, it's just so important. When you think that your kids are just babies and they're not really aware, I do think that there's an awful lot that happens during that period of time that really counts for something.
You have to fill their cup, don't you? Literally.
Yeah, absolutely.
If you were to give yourself a report card for your first act, what would it say? What would you say to that 16-year-old?
Tenacious, show off. But I'd probably get reasonably good marks because even though I left school very young, I did, until the moment I left, get very good marks. So I did once have chalk put in my mouth for talking so much in class. Those were the old days. It was the 70s, old school.
But chucked at your head, dust, but the board dust. Yeah, do you remember that?
I had a teacher called Miss Needham who used to stand flicking a switch. I mean, literally like a willow switch on her hand, just threatening you if you got your spelling wrong. That was right back at the very beginning, old school. But so I think I'd get good marks, but I would be considered to be quite, talkative and you're thinking that I knew everything.
I think that bravado probably helped you.
I think bravado is a good thing. The only trouble is if you're not ready for when it comes crashing down, and also it disguises often an insecurity, and I've definitely displayed bravado all my life, particularly in work context, but it has definitely disguised that sort of sense that you're somehow just getting away with it and you're the interloper and the outsider in the room and you're going to be found out at any minute. So the best thing is to be really noisy and act like you know what's going on and then go home and go, whoo, got away with it again.
I completely relate to that. And I'm so sorry to hear about the passing of your father at 16. And I know when the worst thing happens in the world, it can often be like the worst things happen, nothing bad can happen to me. And you had that so young. Did that help you in your career? I mean, you've had some very glamorous jobs in your first act. You went to amazing parties with Hugh Grant, dated George Clooney. You were organising PR for Live Aid with Bob and Paula Geldof. You were just the it girl. You still are, but you were just so fabulous. But were you fearless because the worst thing had happened?
It definitely gives you a sense when you lose a parent young, and I think particularly as a girl when you lose a father figure, it definitely gives you a sense of the precariousness of life and that you can't take it for granted. And mine was maybe further complicated by the fact that my father was an alcoholic and I'd watched him disintegrate before he died and not take chances that he could have taken, career opportunities that he could have taken. I mean, I probably came to London specifically because he'd turned down a job at the Sunday Times. He was a journalist at the Irish Times in Dublin, their foreign editor, and he'd turned down this job at the Sunday Times in London, which I'd slightly and perhaps wrongly seen as this glimmer of light. Like if he could head towards that, then everything would change. And so when he didn't, and then he died, I think it stayed representative to me as a hope, as a something to sort of aim towards. And I think that carried on for a long time. I mean, there are bad things and good things. I think on a career level, it was quite galvanizing because I just thought, I've got to do it. I've got nobody. I've got to do it. My mum was struggling in Ireland with no money and for four other children. And, there wasn't anywhere to go back to. So I had to make it work. But on the other hand, I think that losing the male figure in your life at that age also really has a dramatic impact on your relationships for quite some time. It leaves a big hole. You try and fill it. You try and fill it perhaps with the sort of people who perhaps embody the very things that your father, in my case, was enduring or suffering from, so they tend to be addictive or troubled personalities, maybe depressives. It really informs, and you constantly want to try and succeed where you failed with your dad.
I read this article because I've got daddy issues too, where, when your protector doesn't do their job for whatever reason, and you're abandoned in a lot of different ways. I completely relate to that. And I read this article which said that you pick sexual partners based on your father, and as an adult you try and fix what you couldn't fix as a child. Do you relate to that?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, you've just said it in a far more articulate way than I just did. And in all fairness, for a long time, I was sort of famously single, but I mean, I wasn't single. I'd have a relationship for 3 years and then it would end, and then it'd be 3 years later I'd have another relationship, and that kind of went on through my 20s and 30s. And it wasn't until I was about 30, I was 39 when I met my now husband. And I think he was probably, I used to say, men, they're all terrible, useless. I can't have children until I meet a man who I think would be a good father. I mean, that was true in a sense, because that's one very serious consideration I think you have to have before you embark on a serious relationship. But it was only when I met Jason, my husband, at 39, that I realized that I'd broken a pattern. Here was someone who actually didn't need fixing. He was whole, human being, brought a lot to the table, and that was such a relief and such a change.
What made you ready to receive that? Because I think for me, I know I'm getting divorced, I get it. I wasn't ready to receive what I think I need. But what made it different for you? You're like, I'm ready, I can receive. You may fill my cup of love.
Beautifully put. That's exactly what I thought. You know what? I got to sort of 38 and I started thinking, of all of this has happened, all of this, the stuff you talk about, the sort of glitzy, successful stuff. But actually, I've failed in the things that I really, really wanted, and I need to take stock. And I thought, maybe I'm never going to have children. Maybe I'm never going to be married again, because I had a brief marriage with a very good friend now, but early on. And I decided to make my 39th year a year when I just did anything I was asked, pretty much. And so I went on stage for the first time, as an actor, as it were, and did the vagina monologues. I went on various trips that I would never have taken. I went and worked in Brazil for 6 weeks as a sort of trainer in a boot camp, getting people to walk up mountains again, and, do loads of exercise, and where nobody knew me. And so I had, I wanted to feel what it was like, all the different ways I could be somebody else, or, yeah. And at the end of that year, in the November, I went on a trek for the Children's Society, and Jason was on this trek, and we really did, it was like a sort of sibling relationship for that week. He really got on my nerves. We bickered all the way through it. I was like, Jason, do you think you could keep it down in your tent? You're keeping everyone awake, and it was but then when I came back to London, and this relationship I was involved in broke up immediately. I sort of landed, which was another of those ones I've described. My friend Gina made me go out on a date with Jason when we got back, and I just suddenly felt at home. You know, he called me, we went out for dinner, he'd booked the restaurant, he called me at the crack of dawn the next morning to go, I really enjoyed that, you know, what are you doing tonight? I was like, steady on, you know. He just, from the minute he appeared, he felt present. And I think because I'd done all those things that year, because I'd thrown caution to the winds, I think that's why I was open. That's a long answer, but I think that's why.
Can I just say, I absolutely love that. I think what you did in that magical year was you put down the stories of who you were.
Yeah, and I think I managed to become me, not just the sum of the experiences of my childhood, you know, in a way. I think I managed to ditch some of the insecurities and the patterns, you know, that form.
Yeah, I completely relate to that. You were out of survival. And I think so many people are in survival. And I know my personality was shaped in reaction, and probably yours as well. Yeah. And so that year was the first time you were you.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that thing about survival is really important to recognize in yourself, because it's a really corrosive way to live, because you're constantly, you know, in fight or flight, and really that you almost have to lose fear. That's the thing. And I think I lost fear because I thought that these things that I really wanted weren't going to happen. So it was like, what's the worst that could happen? And in a way that was galvanizing again.
As soon as you release, it comes. It's the law of the universe. And I keep on saying it to my children. I have to believe it for myself. But as soon as you let it go, you get everything you want.
Yeah, well, I don't know if you get everything you want, but as soon as you let it go, you create space for other things. You know, until you do that, there just isn't any space for good things to happen because you're too busy fighting.
So true. Did you know your skin's collagen has an expiry date? From your mid-20s, your body starts making less of it. During menopause, that decline speeds up. What the hell? That means less skin elasticity, more fine lines, and a lot less oomph. That's why there's Absolute Collagen. It's skincare you drink, working from the inside to support your skin. So your glow isn't just painted on, it's built within. And their clinical trials? Well, 100% of women said their wrinkles were visibly reduced. Wow. And that's why Absolute Collagen is the perfect partner for Second Act. They understand women in midlife because they've been there and want to help you look and feel your absolute best. So if you're curious, try the Absolute Collagen Commitment and see what it does for you. Absolute Collagen is now available on 3 for 2 in Boots stores and at boots.com. What does the term Second Act mean to you? Was that year, that 39 year, was that the beginning of your second act? Was meeting your husband, becoming a mother? What does that mean to you?
In retrospect, I suppose it might have been the beginning on a positive level of my second act, because certainly it was the point at which, you know, my life pivoted in a different direction, one that I'd sort of longed for, I guess, in a way, to a place of security where I felt a bit more able to take risks, and, you know, it was just, it felt healthier. But I think that on a more, I mean, not negative level, but, you know, I think it's important to address these things. You know, I think it also began in my mid-50s or early 50s when, you know, in the space of a week, and these sound like, you know, first world problems, but having had, you know, an amazing discount at John Frieda and at Prada and places like that for most of my, you know, TV working career, suddenly they all stopped. And I don't think that's a coincidence. I think it's got to do with, you know, the value we put on mature women in this world. And it's something that, you know, is still very present. And, you know, despite all the campaigning that's going on, I think it's very, very hard to get that societal shift in motion. And, you know, I think it's very deeply entrenched. And so it was quite shocking, because the other thing you discover when you age is that you always think, oh, well, I'm going to grow into being, you know, and then when I'm 55, I'll feel 55, and 58, I'll feel 58. But actually, I think we all sort of stop at a certain age and are always surprised that, so when I look in the mirror and see the quite wrinkly version of me now, I think, I'm 38. How do I look like that? And, I'm lucky because mine is a realistic 38. There's lots of people who get stuck at 18, and think, oh my God, what's happened to me? And so that realization that despite the fact that you feel very much as vital and energetic and ambitious as you ever were, the world is saying, not so important to us anymore. And that can be summed up in something as ridiculous as a kind of discount, because what the discount means is they want you to be an ambassador for them, and the withdrawal of it means the world doesn't want that anymore. And so I think that was, because that came, thankfully at the same time as I was doing a lot of campaigning around menopause and so on. So I feel like I was more resilient to it than a lot of other women might be, who are feeling really terrible, don't understand why they're feeling really terrible, at the same time as the world is kind of turning them into a sort of foggy blur that's invisible and really not a part of what's deemed as kind of society anymore. So I think it's really, really difficult.
It's that invisibility that so many women talk about. You said, like, the clock strikes midnight on a certain age and suddenly the discounts go, you're invisible, you're not relevant, people don't see the value, the misogyny, the patriarchy, you feel it in full force.
Yeah, I mean, for someone like me who's kind of campaigned around gender issues all her life, or all my life, it was almost as though it was even bigger than I'd ever imagined it to be. I definitely felt this looming sort of black ceiling. People talk about glass ceiling. It didn't feel glass at all. It felt like not even a cloud, because a cloud you might be able to poke your head through. It just felt like this lid, this black lid that there was no way you were going any further. And, you were going to be trapped in this dark box for the rest of your decades, which is why menopause, until I kind of understood it better, it was like sort of menopause, then you die, and so I think all of those things contributed to this feeling of a second act, with its positives, which I would now argue are enormous, but also the negatives that you have to surf in order to get to the positive place.
Oh, you are just speaking for so many women, and you literally are speaking for so many women with your amazing menopause mandate, which I'm very proud to be a patron of.
Yes, and we're very grateful to you for being a patron.
Tell us about the beautiful work that you're doing. What is that about? Why is this important to you? And how did the menopause affect you?
Goodness. Okay, sit back. Get yourself comfortable. Here we go. No. First of all, menopause affected me, I think, not as badly as it does lots of other women. But for a couple of years at the end of my 40s, I had terrible insomnia and anxiety. I'd wake up in the middle of the night, heart palpitating, worrying about, whether I'd shut the cat flap or bought milk or world peace, and it didn't really matter. Whatever it was, I would get equally stressed about it. And I went to see a number of different GPs. I did blood tests. I did all the things that you're meant to do. And, I got told I was post and not menopausal at all over the period of those 2 years. And then I finally went to see a very good gynecologist who went, I definitely don't need to do a blood test. In fact, as we've discovered, blood tests are not reliable, particularly during that period where your hormones are really going up and down, because they register different results, on a daily basis. Anyway, she diagnosed me and then said, right, I'm going to send you for a bone density scan. And I bring this up only because I was like, I haven't slept for 2 years and I'm really anxious. bone density, who cares, And it turned out, of course, to be one of the many, many things that we really didn't know about menopause then. And this was only 10, 11 years ago. It turned out that it was one of those really, really treacherous underlying symptoms, which HRT can be incredibly beneficial toward alleviating, along with heart disease, but which nobody talked about. The only thing I knew about menopause when I was right in it was, periods stop, you got hot flushes, and then disappeared. Poof! and that was it. And so, I've been driven all through my life. I'm the daughter of a feminist, but I watched that group of female feminists, sort of second wave, shout a lot, but never actually managed to kind of live the lives that they were shouting about. They were still very much in the grip of the patriarchy. A lot hadn't changed. Your friend would have a husband who was a bit more powerful with a bit more money, and so you'd try and move in on it. I mean, it was really, I think it was a very difficult time, and it created some, incredible female iconic figures like Germaine Greer. But I would argue they were less of a sisterhood. It was more of a catfight. I think nowadays that's changed, and that's one of the really great benefits that you see is like women working together and the change that you can achieve, which is why, I set up Menopause Mandate, was, that lots of us individually could talk about issues around aging and womanhood, but together our voice would be hard to drown out, whereas singly we were easy to just pick off. And I still think that goes on. I mean, I don't know if you remember, I know I'm going, way off topic here, but when that whole lad culture came in the 90s, and I remember just being totally flabbergasted and thinking, we're being made total idiots of. We're being told that if we laugh off everything about being female and act like guys, then we're cool. We're totally being gaslit. And I think, yet again, in the same way that women, in the second wave feminism, burnt their bras because they could be like men. And suddenly, 20 years later, we were being forced into the same place. And I think now, in many ways, it's almost worse, because I think what's happening with young girls particularly, and the tyranny of Instagram and influencers and all of the democracy that we were promised by the internet has turned into a tyranny. And these girls are growing up thinking they need to look like avatars, that their breasts have to sit up here and no. And they have these faces with the makeup on, at the time when they're most beautiful in their lives, between sort of 18 and 26, they're wearing, so much makeup to kind of get rid of all expression of personality. I mean, I just find it really upsetting and really, really tragic. So, I mean, that's definitely a kind of, yet again, it's like the revenge of the patriarchy, still haunting us. But menopause. I think the thing that's specific about menopause, but actually now I've kind of changed my thinking on, and I think really has to embrace all of women's health, is menopause galvanized me into battling, because I could not believe the injustice of it. I couldn't believe that this thing happened to every single woman and was, speaking of gaslit, we were completely gaslit. And not only that, but it was considered shameful to even bring it up. It was the dark and dirty secret that could only be whispered in the darkest, toilet corners. And that just screamed at me. I was like, I can't live with this and have my daughter grow up, ashamed of something that's completely compulsory and just marks a turning point in our lives. And maybe in a moment we go on to talk about the positive turning point that it marks. And so I just couldn't stand it and had to speak out, and made the BBC documentary, and I wrote a book with Alice Smelly, and then, of course, set up Menopause Mandate so we could change things. But what I've realized in the sort of grip of all of that campaigning is that it's not just menopause. Menopause was the sort of final frontier in a way, and it was the unspeakable bit of women's biology. But when I grew up, periods were unspeakable. I mean, I would go into the supermarket and I would hide my Lillettes or tampons underneath a cereal packet to buy them, so that and then try and hide them from anyone in the queue because I was so embarrassed. I would pretend to my boyfriends in my 20s that I wasn't well, rather than have to say, not tonight, it's my period, or and all of those feelings of shame about the things that happened to my body. And what I've realized now is that the entire workplace is built on a male model. And that's not to demonize men for it. It's just historically fact. It's built on this, vertical trajectory. Starts at the bottom, you work your way up, you retire and play golf, sort of thing. And there's no consideration for women's biology in there. And society has never made any consideration for the fact that our economies are built on 50% of the population going out and doing work for money and power, and 50% of the population staying at home and working for no money and no power. And that's been a kind of, codependent relationship for a very long time. Now that's shifted since the Second World War. Women are now almost equal in the workforce in terms of a number of them. And yet workplaces haven't changed at all in order to factor things in. So, for example, like flexibility during the pandemic, really good example of something that was presumed to be for women because women needed to be flexible. Why do women need to be flexible? They need to be flexible because they get dumped with all of the domestic work along with their own working life. And yet, flexibility being brought in has proved to be something really advantageous to everybody. It makes a difference.
And health.
Absolutely. That's what I'm saying. Physical health,
sick days that go down, everything.
So, turning workplaces into female-shaped spaces and turning career paths into the curvier kind that favour women will be of benefit to all, but we have to do it because the current situation is untenable and it's driving women crazy, in particular because they are literally having to do 2 jobs and sometimes 3, because you get to my age and then it's your parents, your children, and your work and your partner, and it's pretty full on. I am very interested in how you can make change, and it's why I took the role with the government as the menopause employment ambassador, because at first I thought, is this going to stop me being able to campaign? And then I thought, well, most of the time I'm campaigning, I'm pushing to get the corridors of power to make changes, and if I don't take the opportunity, though it seemed both terrifying and a lot of work for no money, I nevertheless thought this is, I would be, betraying everything I believe in not to try and push this thing as far as I can.
I always believe you burn things from the inside out, metaphorically.
Yes.
Metaphorically. So you get in there and you burn it down and you change it for good. So I think that's a really powerful thing you're doing. And talking about that model of work and motherhood, and yes, when you are at home and you are raising children, you are making new taxpayers, you are doing a very important job. And if you're working with children, that's another level we all know, you and I both can relate to. You became an older mum at 41. I love it. I was a borderline geriatric mother at 33. Thank you very much.
I love the geriatric. I mean, yet another way of putting women down.
Yes, they were like, you are borderline geriatric mother at 33. So you were 41. You've got your
42.
You were
Actually,
42.
I was 41 when I got pregnant. 42 when I delivered.
That's amazing.
My daughter, who's my first child.
How did that shape your second act, and how did that? I love that for you, because we are told so many stories that it's over by the time, if you're not sort of married and babied off by 28, it's over. I love that you just push so many boundaries in so many different ways. How did motherhood help shape your second act? Or
Well, first of all, I think that I was incredibly lucky to get pregnant. And there's a lot of women that aren't that lucky and who do, for a myriad of different reasons, end up at the end of their 30s and realizing that they're not going to be the parent they wanted to be. And I think that's tragic. And I've tried very hard to avoid sort of proselytizing for the older parent, because I just know how perilous that was. And as I say, mine was a complete stroke of luck. I mean, it took a year of hard labor, which would be enough to put you off sex for a few years, but actually only put me off for about 5 months after I had my daughter, because I then found myself pregnant with my son just like that. I think your body just goes,
yes,
oh, hello, I know what to do with this.
Yes.
You know, so I'm just very cautious about kind of going,
it's a gamble.
Yeah, you know, do all whatever you want in your 20s and 30s, and then you'll have babies in your 40s. It doesn't work like that. And I think it's one of the hardest things for women, particularly because of the way the workplace is currently shaped. And that's why it needs to change, because women have to make choices. Yeah. And, you know, there's no question that at the moment, when you have children, it costs you financially. You lose, 4% of your salary every child you have. And by the time you get to pension age, you've lost 20 to 30% of your pension value because of the time out that generally you have taken. So, all of those things are very complicated. That said, it was my dream. It was my dream to have these two amazing characters come into my life. It's funny how after I had my daughter, I just thought, this is it. I'm so lucky. I've had a child, And then when I found out I was pregnant again, which was a bit of a shock, one margarita and a holiday in Mexico, and
always away.
But when I found out I was pregnant again, I was really scared, because I didn't think I could love. I didn't think I had space for more love. I loved my daughter so much, and it just was unimaginable to me that I could squeeze out more room in my heart. And then my son came along, and I realized that, your heart is infinite in its scope, And I guess they made me, if anything, want to change the world more and faster, particularly my daughter, because I think it's still very difficult for women in this world, for all the reasons we've talked about, but for both of them, really. I mean, look at us now in the midst of this warmongering, hatred, and polarization, and political fracturing, and it's not a great picture, and it's certainly not a place I'm happy to pass away, leaving my children in. So I think really what it did was just galvanize me to do more faster. I felt a sense of urgency.
I completely, the mama bear comes out, doesn't it? It's like, I think especially for women in our generation, where you are expected to be the last, to be a good girl, to don't lower your tone and be be quiet. But as soon as you have children, you're like, you flip the car. When the car goes on children, you see these mothers hulk out and flip cars and just become incredible superheroes. You want to be a superhero. Is that how you feel?
I mean, a superhero is like unrealistic, whereas I just want to push the boundaries just the little bit I can. And I think we live in a world right now where it's very hard to feel as an individual that you have any power at all. And that's really demoralizing for people, individually, but also I think for societies. You need to people to be able to feel that democracy works and their voice is heard. And I think that's one of the things that we're really missing at the moment. And yet, you know, look, I came over on the ferry at 16. You know, I must be living proof to some extent that individually you can incrementally change the world. And if you pull people with you, then you have a big voice.
I love that. And it is about holding hands and being collective in the way that it was dog eat dog growing up. And, you know, as a child of the 80s, 90s, dog eat dog. But it's not like that anymore. Let's all hold hands and win together.
But I also don't believe that the world is like that, you know, because I think the thing that we miss, you know, we have this 24-hour news feed all the time. But what it never recognizes are all the incredible, hopeful stories happening out there. All of the totally, you know, common or garden, you know, heroes and, you know, heroes, both female and male, doing really important things around the world on a daily basis, whether it's bringing food to your neighbor, whether it's, you know, I've been reading this writer, David Grossman, recently, who's an Israeli writer, and the compassion and humanity with which he writes about Palestinians and sees the bigger picture, and it's so moving. You know, yesterday on the tube, going wherever I was going, first of all, a young guy, my son's age, you know, probably 19, offered me the seat when it came available, and I thought, what a nice kid. And I, you know what I instantly think in those situations, I think, great mum, you know. But then there was another woman standing next to me, sitting next to me, and then she saw a woman come in who clearly had osteoporosis and her neck was all bent, and she got up and offered her chair. And I just thought, all around us is goodness, but all we hear about is darkness and negativity, and it filters into our feeling of our potential, and we have to break through that.
Decency, kindness is all around, and like the Lego box, we can build on it. I think that's so true, and not to lose sight of it, that you have power to do something in your life, in your community. Let's talk about, you got engaged the night before your 40th birthday, which I love that.
It was midnight.
Midnight.
No, it was midnight.
I love that for you. They literally need to teach us in schools. It's like, you know what? You're like, it's not. Oh God, the patriarchy. We were brought up with, you know, Disney princesses and this and being rescued, but like, and that if things don't happen by 30, it's over. Your life is over. And I love how you have broken every stereotype, every rule, and you have this beautiful marriage with someone who's obviously giving you wings to be more of yourself, which I think love can do when it's very beautiful and positive. How has your marriage helped you, and how have you been able to make it so positive for 20 years?
Well, he's very difficult, I'll tell you that. I mean, no rose-tinted glasses here. No, I think I've been really lucky again, because the man who asked me to marry him on the eve of my 40th birthday, literally on the eve, is solid as a rock. And I mean, he's also conniving. I mean, any man who picks you to ask you a question like that when you're really vulnerable, you know, and you know, he's actually planned that, hasn't he? And
he's just
thought,
smart. I have respect.
There's no way she's going to say no on her 40th. But yeah, I think he gives me a sense of security. That means that it doesn't matter how big the risks I take, there's always that place to go back to and, you know, gather strength again and step out. And that's so important. And, you know, young love is a precious and wonderful thing. I watch my kids falling in love and their friends, and, you know, it's so powerful and so passionate. But actually there's an awful lot to be said for the kind of mature love that makes you feel like there's no place like home, you know, and it's hard to find, and you have to be, I think, open to it, because it doesn't always present itself with roses and champagne and violins, and it can be quite mundane, and there are good days and there are bad days, there are good months and bad months. But I suppose that the thing that Jason and I have is touch word, I think, is just an understanding that we're in it for the long haul. So when the going gets tough, we just, for a little while, we might lead slightly parallel lives, and then we come back together again. Everything in life is about, adapting and working through things.
I love that. It's a choice, isn't it? I choose to walk this life with you.
Yeah, I think it's absolutely a choice. And, I've got a lot of friends who split up from marriages and now, are like best friends with their exes and haven't replaced them with anyone better. And you think maybe if they'd just navigated that period of turbulence, that's, I think, the whole point of a long-term relationship, in a way, is that you make a commitment for the long term, and then through the difficult bits, obviously not if you're in trouble, if you're, have a violent partner or abusive, but obviously not in any of those situations. But if you're really good friends, that's the thing that matters in the end.
Yeah, friendship, a good solid base. So friendship and respect.
Yeah.
So let me ask you, what are you doing differently in your second act compared to your first act?
Well, the great thing, because we talk a lot about the sort of negative things around menopause and so on, is the liberation once you're through it. And I don't know if it's partly tied up with the fact that we're told this is the worst thing that could ever happen to you, which it definitely isn't. It can be challenging. But the sense... there are things that happen naturally, biologically. The fact that you're no longer fertile means that your empathy, the loss of estrogen takes your empathy levels down. And suddenly, actually, you become much more selfish. You care about what you're doing in a way that you haven't done since you were perhaps a teenager, And along with that, there comes this sense that if I can get through this, I can get through anything. So again, a kind of strengthening of resolve, a sense of liberation, freedom. I had an accident with my HRT quite recently and ended up having my first period for 10 years. I cannot tell you how awful it was, and what a reminder it was of some of the good bits of going through menopause. And so I think I think I'm stronger. I'm much more stable emotionally. And I've always, taken things on even when they made me afraid. But now I don't even get afraid. I just think, I'll give it a go, be fine one way or another. And so I think, it's made me fearless. I feel liberated. I feel liberated by a loss of empathy. I'll now leave the kitchen for everyone else to clear up, or whatever, and I think it's a really positive thing. And I see it in so many women my age.
I'm taking up more space. It sounds like that. You take up space and the guilt is gone.
Yeah. Totally. And actually, in many ways, that's the lesson that I would give to my younger self, is just take up space. Don't be afraid. All the things that you're afraid of reduce you. And if you conquer that fear and take the space you deserve, then you feel a degree of fulfillment that you can't imagine.
I was going to say, is that the advice you'd give to our listeners, to your younger self? Advice from your second act to your first act was just take up space.
Yeah, I think take up space. Don't be apologetic about your opinions or your ideas or your ambitions. Ambition is still a dirty word for a lot of women. You feel uncomfortable using it because there's something distasteful about a woman expressing ambition. Well, I don't think that's the case. And, we have to fight against all of these assumptions about what being female is about. So yeah, take up space, don't be afraid, be confident in whatever you pursue, you know. I was, you know, I spent so much time like compensating and trying to make things okay around my, you know, dad's passing and all of those things. And now I just wish that I'd, you know, it's funny. Here's the thing. You look in a box of old photos and you see pictures of this girl, let's say in her early 20s, and you look at them and you think, she's not bad. But I don't remember a single day of my 20s when I looked in the mirror and thought, not bad. You know, and that's what we as women have to really work hard to change and make sure our daughters don't experience as well.
Oh my God, I never looked hotter. And I hated myself the most.
Yeah. I was like, and my legs, oh, my thighs are, you know, they were bigger than my friend Natalie's. I look at them now, I dream of those thighs. You know?
I say to my girls are 14, I know it's toxic, but you're never going to look hotter from now to you're probably 30. Do not waste, and you'll look hot after that too, but do not waste 1 second of your youth hating yourself, comparing yourself. Could you please just enjoy every delicious moment of your life?
Yeah, absolutely.
They don't believe me, but I say, please do not beat yourself up the way I think generations of women were taught to.
But sadly, they live in an era when, you know, the prescriptive nature of how they're supposed to look and the endless bombardment of really, really corrosive social media is at its height. And I think they probably worry even more than we did about not fitting into the stereotype of what we should look like.
It's true. Like you said, you have a box of photos. I have a box of photos. They have like 100 a day. It's a completely different culture. I've got like 20 from my 20s because I couldn't afford to go to Boots and have it.
And I've got none of my teens at all. Like literally none. I think my photos stopped when my parents split up and then sort of started again kind of mid-20s when I started working in television and other people, you know, strangers took pictures of me.
It's a blessing and a curse. But my goodness, if you could go back and give that 16-year-old some advice or a hug, what would you say to her?
You know, all of the things I've said, you know, we need to, as women, give each other confidence and we need to build on the success of our entry into the world and understand that it's not a favor and it's not a sort of moral imperative to make space for us as women. It's actually economically essential, you know, morally unquestionable, and ultimately, you know, it's going to be what saves humankind is that blend of yin and yang. You know, at the moment, there's just way too much male power out there. And, you know, the world at the moment could definitely be assisted by a lot more estrogen. And I'd like to see more of it out there. And I'd like to see that 16-year-old me confident that she could play a part in that.
It's time for your second act, where we read emails and voice notes sent in by you, my wonderful listeners. This one is from Grace. Hi Ateh, since starting the perimenopause, I've had a huge knock in my confidence. Have you ever experienced anything like that? And what are your tips for getting back on track? Well, thank you so much, Grace, for writing in. Mariella, what do you think? What advice do we have for Grace?
I'd say to Grace, first of all, that I sympathise enormously, that she's definitely not alone. She's in a huge majority of women. You know, I think you can go onto the Menopause Mandate website and see testimonials from thousands and thousands of women where you can recognise the things you're going through, which is sometimes very helpful because it feels like you're not alone. But I think most importantly, you have to information up. That's the thing that I think is most helpful, because once we understand what's happening with our bodies, then we can make informed judgments about how we want to support ourselves through a period that can be quite turbulent, but you come out the other side and, you know, I think with renewed kind of vigor and a sense of freedom and liberation. So I would say, you know, arm yourself with information. if you can take HRT, consider it very seriously because it's the best support. And don't let what still lingers in society, that sort of, judgment of maturing women, don't let it, scratch anything more than your surface, because ultimately it's just completely unjustified and you're going to feel great very soon.
Welcome.
And welcome.
Welcome to this wonderful part of your life. I'm excited for you, Grace. Thank you. I want to say thank you for everything you're doing, not just for me, but for my daughters, for your daughter and all the grandchildren and everybody, because you are making a huge difference. Thank you.
Well, thank you for saying that. But I have to tell you that the pleasure is all mine. Like, it really, I wake up in the morning, I think, oh yeah, today they announced a national formulary for HRT that's now going to be included in the NICE guidelines, which means that from, I think, 2028, it's not going to be a postcode lottery dependent on what you are allowed to be prescribed in terms of HRT. It's a huge step forward. We wouldn't have even thought of it 10 years ago. I mean, I just feel like things are changing and there's nothing more delicious.
Ooh, congratulations. And yes, let's do this. Thank you so much. I'm so overexcited to have you. Thank you. This has been so inspiring. Thank you so much for joining us on Second Act.
You made it very easy and a pleasure. So thank you very much.
Thanks so much for listening. If you've got a dilemma or question you need answering, email me at secondactpod@hellomagazine.com. And don't forget to rate us if you enjoyed the show. And you can find all the best Second Act intel from our experts via the Hello Magazine website. I'll see you next week. Bye.